Hello, hello, hello. This is Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes bringing you the word from SDB. So glad to be back for part two of the five-part series, SEX and the CEO, a candid discussion of sex in the marketplace and in the workplace. Hey Lorenzo, thank you for joining. I told you I'd be back for day two, and I'm going to answer your question tonight about dress and appearance and how this influences, how it impacts, and it instigates, perhaps, the issues that we have in the workplace. So this is, as I mentioned, a two-part series, and a five-part series. This is part two of a five-part series, and it is largely spawned by a lot of the discussion that is in the news. Sexual harassment is nothing new. It is nothing that is just now happening. It just so happens that there are many high-profile situations going on, the most recent of which is one happening out in Hollywood with Harvey Weinstein, who has been accused of a pattern of sexual harassment allegations and even sexual assault. And so it brings to the forefront a very, very important issue. So this is something that is important for both men and women to think about, to talk about, and to have a dialogue around. So of course, as a woman CEO, I'm going to be bringing it to you from the perspective of a woman CEO, but this is an issue that is pertinent to both men and women, and it's an issue that men face as well. Of course, it is, in terms of documentation, it is more prevalent. The issues that I'll discuss are more prevalent for women, but I cannot ignore the fact that sexual harassment happens from from women against men, and in same-sex situations. But of course, I'm going to speak about it from my perspective as a black woman CEO, as a woman CEO, and share with you some of the things that I've learned and some things that are very important for us to learn. So why am I doing this series? Okay. It is always relevant as a leadership coach and as a business coach to talk about relevant things. And this is an issue that I faced in my career. This is an issue that many of the clients that I work with face, and it's something that has touched upon, or something that all of us can relate to, and it's something that we don't really want to talk about. So it is important, though, for us to talk about it, and I tend to be a little provocative and put stuff out there. I like to provoke thought and provoke action. So invite your friends. Tell someone, come on, let's talk about sex. Just tell them that, hey, Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes is talking about sex. They at least get them on the line. But we're not going to talk about it, from an inappropriate perspective. We're going to talk about the very real issue of how sex, the issue of sex, affects us in the marketplace and in the workplace. Because let's face it, we are going to work in an environment where people are it's men and women, and in some instances, like I say, same-sex attraction. And so that's a very real thing. It's something that you cannot ignore. However, it is something that you need to be very realistic about. And throughout this series, this is part two of the five-part series, I want to get you to thinking about subtleties that you may not have been aware of, as well as things that you need to do. How do you need to protect yourself if you are a woman and have faced these issues in the workplace, in the marketplace? And again, same thing applies for men, but I'm going to speak to it from the perspective that I know well, and that is the perspective as a woman. Because when these issues arise, oftentimes it evokes these feelings of shame, these feelings of, oh my gosh, I don't want anybody to know, what do I do? And so many times it's the elephant in the room. These things are happening to us, happening around us, but we're not talking about it. We're not addressing it. So I want to give us the forum for doing that. So if you have questions, please, or comments, please put them in the feed. I'm going to do my best to look at them because, your girl is a little, visually challenged, so sometimes I can't see too well, but I'm going to do my best. And also, I'll give you the opportunity, if you have some questions or issues that you don't necessarily want to put in the feed, I will share a way for you to give those to me so that I can be of assistance to you and help you out with that. So today, on day 2 of the 5-part series, SEX and the CEO, a candid discussion on sex in the marketplace and the workplace, we're going to focus on dress and appearance, the impact, the influence, and the instigation of interactions that can arise to the level of being inappropriate and unwanted. So, the first thing that I do want to point out, and this is something that we need to just appreciate, may not be something we want to think about, or may not be something that's necessarily great to think about, but, the burden of sexual responsibility has historically and continues to fall largely on the shoulders of women. I mean, if you have watched any of or paid attention to any of the news coverage around, any rape situation or sexual assault that is talked about on the TV, every single time an issue comes up about what was she wearing, and the woman's dress becomes somehow an issue as to whether or not the sexual assault was a sexual assault or whether it was consent. And, that's the extreme case of how dress and appearance raises its head in discussions about sexual assault. But also in the workplace and in the marketplace, it comes up. I mean, I think about, being a former executive in a company, the dress code. If you look at, let's just say there are 10 things in the dress code, 9 of them are going to be focused on women's attire. Things about the length of a skirt, whether whether a skirt can be, the shirt, and whether or not it is too low, too high, too tight, whether the skirt's too tight, whether the heel's too high. I remember and I'm being facetious about this, one of the biggest fights I ever had, advocates in terms of women's rights, was fighting for the right to wear my 4-inch heels to work. Now, I used to work in a healthcare system, and literally there was about to be implemented this policy that we could not wear heels over the height of 2 inches. There were safety reasons behind it, and some industry issues out there, but it was a one-size-fits-all, and I'm like, well, I'm not taking care of patients. I can walk in heels. Why do I, walking in an office, have to wear 2-inch heels? And the real fact was I didn't even own any 2-inch heels. The only 2-inch heels that I had were cowboy boots, which I didn't think were necessarily appropriate for, or didn't really go well with my outfits. So anyway, this whole conversation about heel height got me to thinking about the disparate impact on women in terms of just ordinary decisions. Now, I wear 4-inch heels because I'm 5'2". No, I'm 5'3". I'm 5'3". I'm really 5'2" 3/4. But I just rounded up to 5'3". So I wear it for the height, so I can at least, be average height among people. And I like high heels, right? I'm not wearing them for any reason other than I like high heels. And it really got me to thinking about, why am I having to defend my right to wear a certain height heel? And although the original policy around the heel height had to do with safety, and it being in a patient care environment, ultimately the conversation got to be around the appropriateness of heels and other attire. So, I began to research it. I began to look at a lot of things, and it just really pointed out to me, how prevalent or pervasive this whole issue of how we show up, how our dress and appearance affects us in the business environment. Because I think it's very rare, or will be very rare, for men to be counseled on, you really shouldn't wear them pants that tight, or you should choose another suit or whatever. Because I remember when I began practicing law, this was in 1997. Yeah, it was back there. But in 1997, when I began practicing law in Houston, Texas, modern times, you would think it was still unacceptable for women to wear a pantsuit to work. We had to wear dresses, because I remember I wore this bad red pantsuit on Friday. It was Friday, right? And I'm thinking it'll be okay on this Friday. And I remember getting counsel. I got called into the office and told, we don't wear pantsuits. I'm like, what do you mean you don't wear pantsuits? It's 1997, not 1897. But, our ability to interact in a business setting is often curtailed by fashion choices, or perceptions about fashion. And so it impacts us on that level, but then it also impacts us at the level of, what is considered appropriate for business environments, and we're often judged on what we wear. I remember talking to a female executive, well, actually, she was interviewing for an executive position, and she came to me just kind of distraught and not really knowing what to do when she had been counseled on the fact that she wore a leopard print shirt with her business suit. And she was told by another male executive, you really shouldn't wear leopard prints because animal prints are sexually suggestive. Now, first of all, he was projecting his issues because at the time, leopard prints, tiger prints, animal prints were pervasive in fashion. It was just considered, it wasn't, and this was a otherwise conservative shirt. I mean, the shirt was up to her neck, and it was a leopard print, and she wore it with a black suit. So, he projected his issues onto her, but it made her feel very uncomfortable because then she began to question whether or not, she was perceived as being professional or not. Because, let's face it, women have breasts, right? I mean, that's we got them, right? So what do you do with them when you're at work? I mean, because we really have to think through our business choices. If you have anything more than a mosquito bite, you've got to be concerned with how they show up when you are around other people. We have to think about, how is this shirt going to make us look? Is it going to, is it going to accentuate? Is it going to cover you? These are very real issues that women have to face just to show up for work. And I remember there was an instance where I was going to be the only woman, okay? I was going to be the only woman at a meeting of business executives. And I wasn't going to be the only woman, but I was the only woman representing my organization. And it was a casual event. And so that means I wasn't going to wear a suit. And I remember agonizing over what dress I was going to wear because I did not want to be perceived as a secretary, because that's another issue to get. Because I was an executive showing up with other executives, and sometimes when a woman is in the room, she's assumed to not be at the table but serving the table. So I had to think about that, but I also had to think about, for many of these male executives, it was going to be the first time that they ever met me, and I wanted to be thought of in a professional way, and I had to worry about showing up in something that was going to, give them the wrong impression. And I agonized over the dress I would wear and the heels I would wear. Whether I would wear short heels, whether I would wear high heels, what type of dress I would wear. And so I ended up, because I didn't want it to be too tight, didn't want it to be too short, didn't want, my girl showing up saying, hey, and, nobody ever looking at my face or listening to what I had to say. And I remember posting about, I wonder if any of my male counterparts are at home agonizing over the shirt and pair of pants they're going to wear to this meeting. No, they aren't. So this is a very real issue that women have to face, and it's particularly particularly exaggerated when you are a woman in a male-dominated environment, because there's so many factors working against you in the fact that you don't look like everybody else. You're the lone woman in the room, or one of very few women, and you're going into an environment where men typically are not used to dealing. And this is 2017, and we still have these environments where women show up and they're the odd man out or odd woman out, and have to worry about not only being able to conduct business, because there's a whole set of issues about how women's voices are often lost in a sea of men, but also just their appearance and how that appearance affects, how they've shown up. So, I see that we have a mixed, group on here. So I'd love, as I'm talking through this, I saw one comment earlier. I didn't get a chance to speak to it directly. I'll go back and look at it. But, let's see, just try and read this. I need to put my glasses back on. Hold up. So, Ephraim, thank you for your comment. And he says, can't speak for any other man. However, I carry a certain tone about myself to where I am, for the most part, not even approached. As a veteran and a black man in corporate America and having a business, I keep it business. And, I'm friendly and draw the line when it comes to that thing that will hurt the bottom line. And that is very important, is that, these are things that we have to think about. And it is particularly a challenge for people who are new to the corporate environment, people who are, just scrolling this back up, people who are uncertain, when they're at the table for the first time, how do they act? Well, how do they show up? What's appropriate? What's not? And, we are transitioning from a time where etiquette, social etiquette, business etiquette, was something that was taught. When I was in high school, home economics was it was not required. I didn't take home economics. My mom, taught me everything I needed to know. She was a seamstress. And so I didn't feel like I needed to go to the home economics classes. I basically had a home economics teacher at home. She taught home economics sometimes as well. So I didn't take the class. But, and then it's come back. It's called something else now. It's not home economics. I can't think of what it's called now. But we're living in a time where business etiquette, social etiquette is not stressed. And there are not a lot of opportunities for people to learn. So a lot of times it's by trial and error. So, things that we may, once we've been in a corporate environment for a while, or the business place for a while, we may think it's common sense, and others are trying to figure it out on their own. They're just trying to be fashionable. And so, we have to be really, and I'll say this, as a woman in a business environment, I have always taken it as my personal responsibility to mentor or to help others, because I didn't get to where I am by myself. I often only had male mentors, and I was very blessed that I had some really great male mentors. I had a couple of male mentors with asinine qualities, but for the most part, the ones who I worked with the most, were true mentors and truly coached me and helped me along. And sometimes we had very candid discussions about, being the only woman, and they would, at least share from their perspective. But when I got an opportunity to be the woman at the table, the woman in the room, I always looked for opportunities to share my experiences. I can't tell another grown woman what to do, but I can always share my experiences. And this is why this conversation is so incredibly important, because we need to be thinking about these things as women. We also need to be thinking about these things as business colleagues, man to woman, woman to man. So, the point of all of this is, ultimately, as women in the marketplace, in the business place, we are more than our clothes, right? We are more than our physical appearance, and we shouldn't be judged by it. And the other thing is, we shouldn't have to dress like nuns to be respected, okay? Our femininity is natural. It's who we are, and it should be embraced. And certainly, there's a delineation between what's appropriate to wear to the club and wear to the beach and wear to the park or whatever, and what should be worn in the office or business environment. And we need to know that distinction, but we want to also be respected for who we are and not feel like we have to confine ourselves because of other people's projections. So going back to that example I gave about the male executive who found in his mind leopard print or animal prints to be sexually subjective, that was his projection that made a woman feel uncomfortable about who she was. And you know, and the way that I have experienced the issue in corporate America is a lot different than how I experience it as a woman in an entrepreneurial setting. Because even though I work primarily with women, I also have male clients, and I also, you know, work with men and attend networking events where men are. And you know, and occasionally, as I've said, I've had some men who want to expand the scope of my services. So, you know, it's a very real issue that I still have to work with. And I'll share an example with you about how it's important to recognize that our fashion choices certainly are our fashion choices, but how other people perceive them is their responsibility. So I had a meeting with a male client and some of his colleagues who happened to be in town, and we went out for lunch, and it was on a Sunday. And so I went through the agonizing, you know, went through the agony rather of trying to decide what would be an appropriate casual outfit to wear, because it's hot. So I didn't want to be in a turtleneck and long pants in the middle of the summer. So I was like, I'm going to wear a dress. So I went through all of my ideas of what would not be too tight, what would not be too revealing, what would not be too short. Okay. So I chose what I thought to be a very conservative, A-lined scoop neck dress that wasn't too short. It was above the knee, but it wasn't all my legs or whatever went out. It was a respectable length, okay? Scoop neck, so that means there's no cleavage. It's a scoop neck, all right? And it's A-line, so that means it's not fitting like a sheath. It's an A-line, so it's loose. So, you know, I'm thinking that I have chosen a conservative outfit. I go to the lunch, I get compliments, and at some point the compliments get to be a little bit too much. I'm like, all right, I thank you so much. You like my dress. I got you. We can move on to another subject. And then afterwards, I happened to see a male friend of mine who I mentioned that I went to lunch with clients, and he was like, you wore that? And I'm like, well, yeah, it's a sundress. It's an A-line sundress. It's not anything, you know, it's conservative. And so that made me realize how many times we are taking on the responsibilities of others' perceptions. And as a woman, we do have the responsibility to just think through what's appropriate for us, what's appropriate for our brand, but to recognize that regardless of what we wear, whether it is indeed tight, because I want a tight dress to a business meeting, but it wasn't because I was trying to seduce somebody. It's because, you know, I had been eating a little too much, and that dress was just too tight, and that's all I had. And so you got to roll with what you got, right? So, you know, but you have to recognize that regardless of how tight, how short, how whatever, nothing that you wear is an invitation for disrespect, for unwanted sexual advances, or for anything other than, you know, it's a dress, it's an outfit or whatever. But we've got to get past this. Boys will be boys. We've got to get past this. Well, what was she wearing? We've got to understand that individuals at the end of the day are responsible for their choices. And if a woman shows up naked, I mean, you shouldn't do that. You know, whether or not an assault occurs is not because she showed up naked. It's about the other person's choice to respect the boundaries and to follow the law, right? So I'm not advocating anybody shows up naked. I'm using it as an extreme example. But my point is, in the business environment, people, men and women, have to be responsible for their behavior, their actions, and their choices. And that's it. You're not responsible for others. Now, you do have to think about you know, how you have to be offensive so that you're not ending up being defensive. But it is something that we have to recognize that at the end of the day, men are responsible for the choices that they make regarding the advances they make towards a woman. Women are responsible at the end of the day for the advances they make towards their male colleagues. At the end of the day, you're responsible for your own choices, and it really shouldn't matter. It really shouldn't matter, but we have to recognize that it does. Now, we've got another comment on here. Put my glasses back on. And, of course, I'd love to hear what you have to say and some of the experiences that you've had. So Lorenzo is sharing that in the workplace, women will allow Taye Diggs and Denzel Washington to perform social touch, yet a shoulder, back, and hand, and sexual jokes. But Lil Wayne sees that and tries it. Now he finds himself insulted and in HR. Should and how should a woman set and keep the boundaries necessary to keep a comfortable work environment? Great question. My rule is this: I don't mix business with pleasure. All right. I just find it to be too complicated. You can manage. I'm gonna talk about that actually tomorrow. So Larissa, you're always anticipating what I'm gonna talk about the next day. So, but tomorrow I am gonna talk or at least is it tomorrow? Yeah. Actually on day 4, I'm gonna talk about that a little bit more. But it's something that I'll talk about throughout the themes. But the thing is, we do have to set boundaries, and we do have to recognize, as I said, we're responsible for our own actions. Okay, and this is something that often is controversial in the context of sexual assault and unwanted sexual advances. A woman is responsible for her actions and her behaviors, and has to appreciate that there are going to be consequences of her behaviors and actions, and there are going to be consequences of the implicit and explicit permission that she gives in any situation that has any sexual undertones, overtones, undertones, as I call them. Okay, there is a level of responsibility, and we have to appreciate the consequences of our actions. However, as it relates to a man crossing the line or a woman crossing the line towards a man, ultimately the person who crosses the line is responsible for that and has to exhibit the self-control necessary to discern between what's right and what's wrong. Because even though the invitation may have been extended, once the invitation has been withdrawn, and consent is no longer a part of the equation. And that's something that we must appreciate, and we must give women and men the right to change our minds. And when it is expressed, I no longer want it, this is no longer part of the conversation, then that's the boundary that has been reestablished. And I think in many instances, we don't set the boundaries because we are not empowered to give voice to our thoughts, to give voice to what we think about a certain situation, which is why I'm having this conversation about sex in the marketplace and in the workplace, because we need to give a voice to the very real issues that we're facing. So women need to have a voice as to how they feel about certain things, and to not, that's one thing I mentioned last night in part 1, is that we don't have to feel any type of way about what is offensive to us, what we want and what we don't want. It's personal. It is individual. I may be very comfortable hearing sexual jokes. My female colleague may not. The fact that I am and she isn't doesn't mean she needs to be subjected to it because I feel comfortable around it, and vice versa. It is individual, and that's something that we have to appreciate in the workplace. Honestly, shouldn't be telling sexual jokes in the workplace and in the marketplace because of the issues, the consequences that it leads to. But it is going to be contextual, and it is individual. So, if you're in a group and not everybody is comfortable with that, then that doesn't need to be part of the conversation, and you shouldn't make the person feel bad about being uncomfortable, because then you are creating a hostile environment, and you have a whole other set of legal issues associated with that in the workplace, and possibly in the marketplace as well. So to answer your question, Lorenzo, we do need to set boundaries, and we need to make decisions about what type of relationship we want to have with our business colleagues, whether that's in the workplace or in the marketplace. And then we have to give voice to those boundaries, and we have to give voice to what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. And hello, joining us from India. And today's your birthday, I remember. Happy birthday, Martesh. I hope I said your name correctly. It might have been yesterday because you're 10 hours ahead, so I think it was yesterday. But you just recently celebrated a birthday. Thank you so much for joining. But it is something that we need to be consistent about, because there are consequences to mixed messages. There are consequences to mixed messages. It is not an excuse. It is not an absolution of the other person's actions, but it does create confusion, which is why we need to learn, both men and women need to learn to articulate our positions clearly and to feel comfortable in advocating when there's a change or advocating what we feel to begin with. So that's why it's important to have these conversations and to create environments where we are able to have the conversations, candid conversations that we need to have. So I've talked about, the implications that it has on relations between the sexes and the complications that it creates. But ultimately, for women, for black CEOs, black CEO women, for women CEOs, for men CEOs, for anyone, it's important for you to decide, to recognize that your fashion is a part of your branding. And this is not just superficial, because it is a part of your branding, and a part of branding is how you're packaged. Okay? Don't have any innuendos with that. But how you're packaged is a part of how the market perceives you. So you need to be deliberate about, what does your package say to others? If people only knew you by your fashion, your dress and appearance, what does that say about you? And does it say what you want it to say? Because how I show up in the marketplace is totally different than how I show up if I'm going to the club, because I still go every once in a while, Now, I'm still not going to be out there too badly, and because I still have a brand, whether it's in the marketplace or in a relaxed environment. That's all I mean. When I go to party, I may show up a little differently, okay? I may, dress a little bit more, casually or whatever, but it's appropriate for the context, but it is still consistent with my brand. So there are casual outfits that don't match my brand in the marketplace or anywhere else. So I don't wear them. I may look good in them, but they don't match my brand. And that's something that we always need to think about, is if we want to be CEOs, whether we are literally a CEO in a company, CEO of our lives, CEO of our business, if we want to be perceived as a CEO, we need to show up and look like one. And CEOs dress a certain way, And again, it's not about wearing a particular suit or brand or red bottoms or anything like that. It is the messaging that conveys who you are and who you want to be known as. So you need to look the part. And you need to look the part that fits for you. It's not a one size fits all. How you show up in the marketplace, again, may be different based on, because how I started my career out, how I started looking when I started as an executive was different than when I left. The more people began to know me and know what I stood for and to know me as a person, the more liberal I got with my appearance, right? I have a piercing in my upper earlobe, and when I started working there, I didn't wear it. And after a while, when I figured they know I got some sense, I put my piercing back in, and so there are things that are acceptable and things that aren't, and you do have to recognize that it's contextual, and you also have to recognize that people are going to have perceptions regardless, okay? Because tattoos are more mainstream in 2017 than they were even in 1997 when I started working. But there are still people that have a negative connotation about tattoos and whether they should be seen in the marketplace, in the workplace. But the thing is, we're not responsible for other people's perceptions. We're only responsible for our actions, and we're responsible for deciding how we want to be branded, what's important to us and what's not. And we need to make sure that our dress and our appearance doesn't detract away from our brand. So, you have to find a way to express yourself and recognize the risks of expression, because, corporate America likes conformity. Let's just face it. They like systems, processes, they like conformity, right? So when you look different, there's a risk. When you look different, act different, sometimes there's an advantage, and you have to make a calculated decision around that. So when you're in the marketplace is a little bit more flexible and appreciates diversity in appearance. I'm using diversity in a different way here. But it appreciates the variety, okay? And in fact, in the marketplace, as an entrepreneur, oftentimes being different is a market advantage. And so you just have to make a decision around it and be deliberate about how you want to show up and what's important to you. So I'm going to sign off. I'm going to go finish my wine and wrap it up because I've got an early morning. I've got a early client, so I got to get up and be alert and awake, and then I got a long day tomorrow. So I'm going to wind down literally, and get ready for tomorrow. So the thing I want to leave you on day 2 is this. Ultimately, your dress and appearance is your personal brand. And regardless of how it's perceived by others, your dress and appearance is never, ever an invitation for disrespect, for unwanted sexual advances, or assault. It just never is an invitation. And we need to get past that, and we need to be very real about holding people accountable for the consequences of their actions and their inability to control their actions. So, but as a CEO in the marketplace, in the workplace, as a woman CEO in the workplace, in the marketplace, we have to be deliberate about how we show up and be deliberate about the brand that our packaging says, or what it says to others in the environment. And we have to weigh the risks and the benefits and make decisions that work for us. And ultimately, we have to recognize that the decisions that work for us may not ever work for anybody else, but that's their problem and not ours. We are responsible for our behaviors and actions, and vocalizing, giving voice to what we want and what we don't want. That is a responsibility that we have, and we need to be empowered to do that and not feel like we need to keep silent. So we need to have more conversations with our peers, with our male counterparts, and with ourselves that empower us to be comfortable in talking about sex. Because let's face it, it ain't going away anytime soon. It's going to keep going. As a matter of fact, that's how the world keeps going. So it's a natural part of life that we need to talk about in an appropriate way, understand our rights as it relates to sex in the workplace and the marketplace, and be comfortable talking about it in a way that promotes dialogue, that enables us to work together so that we can handle our business. Because at the end of the day, that's what we need to do, is to handle our business. So the thing I always say is this: your dress and appearance is a part of your personal brand, so you should be deliberate about your marketing campaign. And I'll say this a little bit tongue-in-cheek. You want to make sure that your marketing campaign is not trying to bring all the boys to the yard, but trying to get you a seat at the table. So this has been Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes bringing you the word from SDB. This is part 2 of the 5-part series, SEX and the CEO, a candid discussion of sex in the workplace and the marketplace. On tomorrow, day 3, I am going to be talking about doing business with the opposite sex. What does that mean? How does that show up? And really touch upon some implicit biases that often come up in how we interact with each other in the workplace that promotes gender discrimination, also prevents women from having access to opportunities to move forward. So we'll talk about that in part 3. So thank you so much for joining. And again, I'd love to see your comments. If you're viewing this live, let me know what you thought. If you're viewing this later, let me know what you think. And if you want to reach out to me personally, you've got some questions, or you want me to address something in the last 3 parts of this series, please give me a text at 228-238-7997. That's 228-238-7997. Let me know if it's something that you want me to talk about that I haven't talked about, so that this can be a vibrant conversation that empowers us with the dialogue needed to be able to promote healthy work environments and to be able to take care of business, and we don't have to worry about the things that are unsaid because we are empowered to say what needs to be said. So this is Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes signing out. I'm getting ready to go have my wine and relax. Like I say, it's been a long day, and I got a long day tomorrow. So thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate you. Share this with your friends, because again, we need to talk about sex, and we need to make sure that this is not something that we're keeping to ourselves and we're comfortable about it, because these are very real issues, and they're not going to go away. And in fact, when we try to hide them under the rug, they create this big old ugly monster that comes out in the most unpleasant of ways. So we need to address it openly and honestly. So thank you so much for joining. Looking forward to being with you tomorrow on part 3 of the 5-part series SEX and the CEO, a candid discussion on sex in the workplace and the marketplace. I will see you. Thank you so much.